A while back, I decided to give basketball another shot, after assuming at a young age that it would never really be my thing. Through a mixture of open-mindedness and testing the waters through sports video games, I came out of it with a fresh perspective and appreciation that I could share with others. Earlier this year, I made a video about a part of that journey, inspiring me to jump deeper into enjoying the sport by associating it with a hobby I already like. It got me thinking that if I stuck to the stuff I know, there might be so much more I could miss if I wasn't looking for it. In doing this, I could shift my old attitude and make way for the start of something new. Despite being the perfect age demographic in its heyday, I never watched a single High School Musical movie. This was intentional. I was a big fan of the Disney Channel, but something about its overpopularity, excessive commercialization, and its mix of a sport I didn't care about made me resent it. Or perhaps I thought not liking it was just the cool thing to do. So here I am now, 17 years late to the party and with too much time on my hands. So join me if you will, as I not only watch every High School Musical movie for the first time, but in tandem also play every High School Musical video game. Right here, right now. Before we start, let's just set up some ground rules. I'll be covering handheld and console games this time around. I'm sure there are some web games out there, but I think it's interesting to look over the choices made for these fully released packages. Not only were these games likely made by larger teams with a bigger scope and direction, but they were also made with the belief that someone would be paying their hard-earned dollars for them. For that reason, these can be looked at a bit more critically compared to essentially a free advertisement. Also, I won't be talking much about the Sing It titles. They're fine, they include pretty much all the songs up to their releases, they look nice. However, I came upon the same problem every time I tried to sing. Before we dive into the games though, let's talk about High School Musical 1. High School Musical isn't a fantastic film, but in retrospect it's drenched in charm for the era that it represents, and makes it a really fun time despite its growing pains. It was a 2006 Disney Channel original movie, the same network that brought us gems like The Cheetah Girls and The Luck of the Irish.
There's something your mother and I need to tell you.
I'm a leprechaun, Kyle.
Everyone wears 2 layers of clothing, which was the style at the time. You still have your plot holes of people just not talking to one another or elaborating due to absurd circumstances, and acting is nothing incredibly different from other Disney movies at that time. I think, however, the mixture of musicals and Disney movie camp proved to be an irresistibly perfect concoction, allowing the actors to be over the top while also maintaining relatability and being grounded by the setting. Of course, the music still remains super memorable. Other than your quota-fulfilling Gabriella is Sad song, everything else is a bop, or at least a very good toe-tapping time. I think as well the choreography of the songs helps move the characters to more exaggerated places than what might not be seen in a non-musical film. It gives room for cheesiness, but provides it a home without giving way to isolate the audience. One thing I did notice, however, is that a lot of audio mixing is not very natural in a lot of the settings. Probably due to there being a lot of auto-tuning for the cast added with a time and budget constraint, the studio recordings don't mix well with the spatial sense of the scenes they belong in. Not that these songs are bad, far from it, it's just that it feels very jarring sometimes when the audio and acoustics just change on a dime. I think this film gets a pass because, as strange as it feels now, this was the first musical movie done by the Disney Channel. It's also endemic of the time that this movie came out at the transition of 4:3 to 16:9 ratio, where originally it released in 4:3. This is important because even more so, I can't take this song seriously when the gum on the wall is still in frame. In all seriousness though, it's cheesy, it's fun, and it's still a good time to watch. The same can be said while going to play the game adaptations. While still being critical, it's time to be in a headspace of a High School Musical fan, going into these games to appreciate them the most. High School Musical Livin' the Dream came out for the Game Boy Advance in 2007. Now well past its years, the Game Boy's last titles were mostly for the little sibling market. Sure, there might be a DS in the household, but that means that the Game Boy gets passed down to the young gander. For that reason, this game isn't very complicated, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The story takes place after the events of the first film, with Gabriella dozing off and dreaming up a scenario where the West High students have stolen the items needed for the talent show. The students believe that the sabotage is done by Sharpay and Ryan, so it's up to Gabriella Montez and Troy of House Bolton to clear their names for them. It's important to note as well that the story for Living the Dream inspired famed filmmaker Spike Lee to write and direct his own story of the same name for NBA 2K16. Playing as the two, you go around East High, collecting items, dodging obstacles, and platforming through various zones in the school. At the end of each level, you have a dance section to complete with an added boon for extra items collected during the level. Much like the atmospheric horror game Detention, in which you are haunted by objects and mythologies of the protagonist's past, High School Musical Livin' the Dream sees obstacles in the shape of teachers and magical basketballs. It being a 2D platforming game, you also have a lot of missions with multicolored keys, which help you give a bit more of a labyrinthine feeling to the levels instead of just back and forth. If you're playing a level as Gabriella, you'll take advantage of her science girl skills and hack computers, and in other instances, random dudes will approach you for a dance-off. If you're playing as Troy, you have additional platforming hurdles, and out of nowhere, a basketball net will drop down to test if you're truly a wildcat. These are alright, but they kind of come out of nowhere and are a bit too frequent for me. Gosh darn it. The end-level dance numbers are pretty good as far as time button minigames go, but the music is really what shines here. You have these really fun Game Boy renditions of songs by Bart Roijmans, and there wasn't a version I didn't enjoy. Once the twins are proved innocent, Sharpay will call out Gabriella's dream and claim that she and Ryan can beat the game faster. You then get to play in Sharpay mode, in which you redo the levels with different skill sets. Sharpay has this kind of mediocre singing ability, but Ryan can double jump, which not only is way more fun, but also confirms that he's a Jedi. The slight change in level design as well as a time limit actually made the game quite a bit harder, and it was pretty fun playing through. This fourth wall break kind of reminded me of the Cranky Kong challenge from Donkey Kong Country, and this isn't even the first time the game made me recall that. Interestingly, some of the sprite work appears to be pre-rendering of 3D models, which can especially be seen in the dance sections of the game. It's a neat trick that worked back then, worked in the DKC remake, and works here too. It may have been the honeymoon phase of me enjoying the franchise, but starting out with Living the Dream set my expectations of what I wanted for a High School Musical game. The locations are here, the music is great. There's still the cheesy charm that the movies are warmly remembered for. It does everything it's meant to do, and it's a nice 3 to 4 hour package with some replayability and bonus features as well if you're interested. And then you get to play High School Musical Making the Cut. This game is focused on dancing and music, but the problem is it's not even competent in doing that. The story sees Sharpay sign up for a competition that has the group going from locals to nationals, and meanwhile, Taylor is having a kerfuffle about Gabriella studying with Chad. It's not a plot worth analyzing, and it serves its purpose for an 8-year-old's fan fantasy. But the quality is still not very good. All dialogue is done using screenshots from the first film's promotional photos. In the Game Boy port, the still portraits were at least an effort made. Making the cut by choosing to use the easier option fails because it can't even be bothered to use this method to a fraction of its ability. Some of the characters will have different pictures for different expressions, while others will have the same image every time. Being released a few months before High School Musical 2, the game features pretty much just High School Musical 1 tunes, with 3 select samples from the upcoming sequel. For this reason, it's a game with only 11 songs, and that will mean that from the 5 chapters of story mode, you'll be replaying songs a lot, with mostly just a change in dance setting. These transition often, which is nice when playing the same songs over and over again. If you are interested in playing this, I heavily recommend only doing 1 chapter per play session. If you keep playing through what I've been looking for, you certainly won't be looking forward to it the 5th time it replays. One of the other problems as well is that the High School Musical 2 numbers are on the harder side of difficulty, meaning that you'll have to wait until near the end of the game to actually access these new songs, shortening your already limited choice. But on the bright side, these songs actually do give a good helping of challenge, and I can imagine replaying for a perfect score would drive some to keep coming back. The repetition of the songs, however, nails home another issue, in that somehow, despite the Disney Interactive publishing, none of the voices are coming from the original cast. Every song of this is a cover, and granted, most of the voices are surprisingly accurate, but this just gives the whole thing an almost bootleg-esque quality. This is actually the case for all the games going forward, save for Sing It! High School Musical 3. But again, it being the first DS title, and the insistent repetition of the songs do Makin the Cut no favors in knowing it's not the real thing. It's like showing Maddie from The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and saying it's Sharpay. You're not fooling anyone. For those familiar with the incredibly popular Osu, the gameplay is essentially an interpretation of that, mixed with some small changes to add in some High School Musical flavors. As you tap and drag along, you will also have to throw basketballs and hoops to break up the formula. The game might also have you drawing out contextless numbers and letters. This will then trigger a 3D vignette, which really just serves as something to change out the same dance screen for a moment. The problem is that this usually repeats itself for every song, making itself a tedious and unwelcome solution. It's also disappointing that dance numbers have no unique choreography and instead borrow the same canned, recycled dances every song. This wasn't such a gripe with Livin the Dream because that was only a portion of the game. Makin the Cut has no excuse. Tapping along to tunes can be enjoyable, but if at any point you miss a note, your characters will fall on their rumps and proceed to slowly get up every time they miss. These blunders will then be transferred over to when you do a music video portion of the game. Perhaps taking inspiration from Make My Video, Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, the game will give you control of the cameras and effects to customize your dances, but it sadly gets old very quickly. You'll have a limited amount of effects to activate, and you can't spam them to ensure any ridiculous outcomes. Unfortunately, it just results in you passively watching the dance numbers you already did, and then tapping a microphone every 15 seconds to get a perfect score. On at least one positive note, playing well will see you unlock custom outfits for a character you can use in free play, but I feel like this is a missed opportunity as well. Quick play will see you dance alone, which is the only time you'll do this in the game. One of the reasons I feel people would want to play High School Musical is to be more connected with the memorable cast, and what better way would this be when actually dancing with them and partaking in the story? The self-insert is something that works really well in lighthearted plots, and so it would have been great to have this option during the story, because once I was done, I made my Guy Fieri, played a song, and then never really came back. Like I said in my Narnia video, I don't think anyone making this game assumed that over a decade and a half later, some donkus would come and make a video essay about a handheld tie-in. But it doesn't excuse the fact that this game's not really fun to play. I knew a lot of these games wouldn't be great, but this is not what I want. This is not what I planned. I'm not trying to hold these games against other big DS hitters. These games were all likely given less than a year to make with a small budget and team. What I'm looking for, however, is content to keep a nostalgic fan of the game entertained past the novelty phase, and sadly it's just not here. Things do get a little bit better in the game department, but before we get into that, let's talk about High School Musical 2. This film knows what worked in the first movie and decides to go all in on the cheesy, campy absurdity, which makes this probably the most enjoyable watch of the whole series. Being set in the summer, they have so much fun with the color choices and atmosphere, to the point where it's surprising to remember that this was a made-for-TV film. The movie retains its over-the-top nature, while the cast brings utmost sincerity to their settings and numbers, selling the songs even more so than the previous film. There's a shamelessly brilliant Michael Jackson impression. The mandatory Gabriella is Sad song actually rocks this time around, and Troy goes full Spider-Man 3, dressing in black and doing one of the silliest but fondly remembered moments of the entire movie. I can't stress enough how much I didn't see this coming and how much I absolutely adored it. You'll still have a lot of plot issues of characters simply not talking to one another, but for the most part, it doesn't spoil the fun. They also polished up the sound editing a lot more, so transitions to studio recordings don't feel as jarring. This movie makes you feel like a teenager, full of overreacted emotions, first tastes of responsibility, and just getting into stupid, wonderful fun. Will you have a good time watching High School Musical 2? Bet on it. High School Musical Work This Out is perhaps not a great game, but it's a much stronger package than the previous DS outing. Released by Behavior Interactive, then known as A2M, this was the same team that made Making the Cut, but major changes in focus helped direct the game to be different while not totally abandoning the material from before. The game follows the events of the movie and swaps between the poster cast members for a series of different activities around Lava Springs. Doing chores will see you continue the day cycles, which, as you may have guessed, is a series of minigames, but among these are the dance numbers similar to Making the Cut. The minigames can be challenging, but almost all of them sadly have little nitpicking frustrations that impede the fun. Most of the games will see you only able to do actions when you're on a beat, so while you tap your targets, your stylus will likely stifle as you fail to interact with an arbitrary time. There's balls, umbrellas, or whatever else is designed with random timers, so unless you're incredibly lucky, many games will see you doing far from perfect as you're handed more than you can possibly handle. The game doesn't penalize this heavily, but it becomes annoying, especially if you're trying to earn trophies, or just have the satisfaction of having no golf balls, yes that's what those are, drop into the water. Music numbers are mostly unchanged from Making the Cut, scrapping the elements that didn't really service the gameplay, which was a solid choice, and also featuring an action at the bottom screen, so you can watch dance moves while you're playing. There does, however, feel like there could have been a bit more done with the settings. Other than some camera movement, backgrounds are more or less static as you tap away, and it doesn't really bring the glam that the movies emit in spades. Unfortunately as well, you won't be able to play your favorite numbers as background music until you unlock them in the story, and for a game paced at around 15 to 20 hours, that's a lot of time waiting to unlock I Gotta Go My Own Way. Despite all these complaints, however, I think this is my favorite DS game of all the titles. Although a lot of gameplay can be lackluster, small and large pieces of presentation make this feel like a far better game than it ought to be. To those who enjoy High School Musical 2, the developers lovingly made a pretty impressive interpretation of Lava Springs Country Club. As you go on missions and fulfill tasks, the game will see you walking around the grounds, which still hold up impressively well, even if the camera is a bit zoomed in. Playing as East High students is fun, and it will take some liberties of making up reasons for these characters to do these particular errands. The flavor text surprisingly goes a long way as to why you need to do the sandwich making game for the 5th time. Perhaps due to the focus on the hub world, character models also look a lot better, with them changing their outfits depending on the day or mission, and dances at least are unique and fitting with the songs. A welcome addition is also the jukebox mode to youngsters who may not have had an iPod but could listen and dance to their favorites from the nostalgically lackluster speakers of the DS. Is this perhaps me looking for a silver lining in a not-so-good game? If it is, I can honestly say that at least these elements do turn this game from bad to an okay time, and that's good enough for me. I wouldn't recommend this to someone who wasn't a fan of the films, or as a method to jumping into the franchise, but it is a satisfying soak in a world built to satiate the interactive imagination of fans. If High School Musical Work This Out is my favorite of the DS games, that means we can only go down from here. But before we get to that, let's talk about High School Musical 3.
16 minutes left, running out of time. 16 more minutes, it's on the line. 16 minutes left, gotta get
was actually a bit worried getting to the third movie. I know it was beloved, but I was expecting a sort of love that happened with the original Star Wars trilogy. You have your breakout hit that surprises everyone at how fresh it is, the sequel that's experimental, leaning into cool concepts the first established, and then your expensive but safe finale, wrapping things up nicely, but in retrospect not as creative as the previous films. Oh boy, was I happily wrong. High School Musical 3 is a great movie. No asterisks, no caveats. It's able to harness serious moments better than the previous entries, without sacrificing any bit of cheesiness that I came to adore. In one scene, you can have a character dream sequencing their peers into Simpson surfs, and then have the same characters give genuine feeling heart-to-heart moments in another. Acting and performances have also gotten better, with Zac Efron providing some of the greatest showmanship in this scene, which went on to inspire famed filmmaker Christopher Nolan to create the film Inception. All musical numbers have at least one unique gimmick to them, making some of them even more visually memorable than the music. Everything is bigger and somehow better, still having heart and still being fine with acknowledging its silliness. I have very few qualms with this film. They're mainly that the final conflict ends with Troy choosing secret option C at the very end of the movie, and that this public display of affection is the equivalent of making out, or possibly worse. I'm telling you guys, the horticulture roof is the best place to eat Sorry guys, looks like it's occupied. It kind of baffles me that within a single year, they made such a good send-off to the trilogy, outshining the previous films in sound quality, choreography, and writing. I suppose having 3 times the budget for the first movie doesn't hurt, but I'm just so impressed that despite being a box office film, it never loses its way. I just wish I could say the same praise applies to the DS game. For the past 2 DS games, I've been unimpressed with the use of padding they deploy, recycling the same content to make them take more time for no other reason than doing so. While repetition can be alright in some regards, especially when they develop a greater risk-reward or continue complexity, it's often not a positive thing. High School Musical senior year for the DS doesn't force you to repeat almost anything, and while I'm thankful for that, it lays bare just how minuscule the amount of content there actually is. The sad thing is, from a gameplay standpoint, this is the best one. There's no story relayed in senior year, so in order to see the credits, you only need to play 12 songs, making this game finishable in 2 hours. For what it's worth, these 2 hours are pretty fun, and really polish up the experience from what was lacking in making the cut and work this out. The dances are unique to their respective songs, there's a lot of work put into the backgrounds and visuals, with transformations happening throughout the songs. My only problem with the visuals is that the character models have PNG faces of the actors, giving a GoldenEye 007 feeling of accuracy, but in perhaps a not so flattering way. Gameplay is unique, using the DS stylus in a creative way to direct a path through the song, while you use buttons to hit certain beats on time, like Guitar Hero or Rock Band, which is really satisfying. The problem is that games like Guitar Hero and Rock Band also exist on the DS, and they provide a much larger variety of songs, not to mention vocal performances from actual artists. There is some replayability in trying to get better scores and play on higher difficulty, but the limited track list really makes much to be desired. Outside of the dance numbers, your only other activity is managing your yearbook, which is where the rewards are stored, and the quiz sections. I mentioned before that the game doesn't bother itself with repetition. The one exception to this are the quizzes. After weeks of watching, listening, and playing through all things High School Musical, I had been successful in injecting the franchise into my normal conversations without thought. On more than one occasion, I discussed with family and coworkers the idea of what High School Musical character they resonate with in a fun little BuzzFeed-esque thought experiment. The problem was when I played this game and had to take that character quiz 14 different times. These quizzes are for breaks between songs, with sometimes multiple quizzes between numbers. The questions are always choosing option 1 or option 2, and the end result is to show what character you best connect with. Not only are these really shallow, but in these moments I couldn't shake the feeling like I was playing a game that could have just been made for a website. It's a sign of the times, sadly, that these low-budget tie-ins were on the way out, and being replaced by the relatively new App Store, with games for a fraction of the cost. I don't know if I fully blame its developer Kryptonite, as they were the same people responsible for Livin' the Dream. It just feels more like its limited stretching of resources resulted in a game with so little content. Although this title is a vast improvement over Makin' the Cut, its failure to go beyond the small fixes or do something more was showing its age 2 years later. The jukebox feature returns, but there's no creatable character this time around, making it a far less personal experience. High School Musical Senior Year is fine, but its bare-bones nature stands out more than either of the other two games. It's fun for a moment, but once that moment ends, it doesn't have anything worth remembering other than its unique gameplay. I suppose what I wanted from Senior Year was actually what I got in High School Musical 3 Dance. I knew when I said I wasn't looking to go over the Sing It titles, it would be fine, as it's mainly just score-based karaoke. This being a High School Musical video though, I couldn't with a clean conscience discredit the title by saying the phrase, "I don't dance." Besides, a prominent part of High School Musical's popularity was just how iconic the dance numbers were, and for that reason, Disney put in the time to feature on its TV programming specific short specials to learn the dances. When speaking to those who watched High School Musical as it was coming out, they would recall learning the choreography or making their own dances to the songs with friends. Even now, a number of East High alumni still hold on to the universe through dances that forever impacted their real lives. Although the songs are what intrude my thoughts on an hourly basis, the muscle memory of dance can also leave the same impression. Depending on the platform you play on, controls will be varied. Wii gamers will use motion controls, and masochistic PC players will use arrow keys. I opted for what I can only imagine was the intended experience. I ventured into downtown Toronto to pick up the High School Musical dance pad, and succeeded with only slight scrapes and bruises, and intense emotional damage from driving on the 401. For this reason, High School Musical Dance plays like the ever-popular Dance Dance Revolution. Stepping on beats accordingly will score you more points, and better scores will unlock costumes and set lists. The game features pretty much every song from the series, and each has its own mocap dancers with unique choreography. Where sometimes it felt like the DS games were animating dances that could pass with multitudes of songs, these ones really do capture the original numbers. Troy, for example, is here in all his glory, more or less dancing beat for beat of the movie, working on his swing and doing his own thing. The selection leaves pretty much nothing out, even including lighter songs like the Troy and Gabriella version of What I've Been Looking For. Speaking of duets, perhaps one of my favorite options of the game was the ability to choose who's singing in each number, and on top of this you can make a custom character to also join in. Someone who isn't a fan won't see much value here, but it's incredibly silly placing your characters in circumstances where they just don't belong. You have your more tame Kelsey and Ryan ship, but then you can commit full blasphemy by pairing Sharpay with Troy. It's just good. No gimmicks get in the way of the dance numbers, there's no arbitrary song limitations, and now that the quizzes don't serve as padding and aren't mandatory, they're actually pretty welcome, with most results not just being about what character you're most particularly like. My only major complaint is that they're still just covers of the original songs, with this being maybe the worst offense since you can't hide behind the compressed and muffled quality of the DS. High School Musical Dance isn't going to blow your socks off, But it really is a great way to gamify the series, and cuts no corners while also looking pretty decent for the PS2. It's uncomplicated, it's the expected package, but stumbling along on a dance pad with friends to High School Musical music will certainly make a night to remember. At the end of the day, I don't think I can recommend any of these games to people who aren't fans of High School Musical. But to remedy this, I would just say go watch the movies first. Much like The Goonies or You've Got Mail, High School Musical resonates with its culture and time. The mid-2000s roots hold to the facets and attitudes of the media climate, and that can be seen in the games that were released alongside them. From the GBA licensed platformer to the DDR home dance pad phase on consoles, on their own, they don't hold up. But for those looking to double down on marathoning the franchise, there can still be fun found in most of these titles. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to a liturgical debate to discuss what is the Divine Canon. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you like what you see, make sure to subscribe so you know when new uploads are released.